Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. This is episode 100. Woo! Well, good evening, friends. I'm pleased to be speaking to you here on episode 100 of the Pick Up and Deliver podcast. I'm watching either a small cat or a raccoon of some sort cross the street. It didn't look like a cat, so I may have just seen a raccoon. That's kind of fun. I'm walking home on a very nice October 9th. It's warm enough that I put my shirt away in my backpack, and the wind is picking up, so hopefully it's not too windy on the old microphone. So I was brainstorming what I might do for episode 100. I was thinking that perhaps because Boardgame Geek is such an important part of my gaming life, perhaps I could do something with the number 100 on the site. I tried looking at the 100th game. I thought maybe I'll look at the 100th game and talk about that. But the 100th game in the top 100 games is Nations, a game I haven't played. I have to go down to 104 for Agricola Revised Edition, or up to 92 Ticket to Ride Europe to even find a game to talk about that I've played. So I don't really see that being a very productive line of inquiry. I tried to look up designers, but there isn't a list ranking 100 designers. I found one. And who was the 100th designer? Like the person who designed the Seventh Continent or something. So, I mean, I've heard of that game, but I haven't played it, so I can't really talk about them. So that was a bust. And I thought, I will look at the 100th game in the Boardgame Geek database. That wasn't even in there. Apparently, at some point, it got deleted, because the 99th game is in there. That's Fortress America. And the 101st game is the Detroit-Cleveland Grand Prix. But the 100th game just doesn't exist in the database. So that's a bummer. So now I'm 0 for 3 on interesting things to talk about on Boardgame Geek. So I gave up on that. And I came across something that I think will actually make for an interesting bit of podcasting. If you're new to the podcast, this is a good time to join us. Welcome, episode 100. What I did is I went through the 99 previous episodes that I've published, and I picked out 10 to highlight as like my top 10 episodes from the first 99 episodes. And I thought we could go from there. I actually picked out about 12 that I thought were worth commenting on, and then I put them in order of the 10. Now I kind of quickly wrote down the titles, so I'm not sure. I may not have the titles exactly correct, but I did also write down the episode number for the episode, so you can go back and look them up on your own. I'll also put this list in the show notes with links, so you can look those episodes up and listen to them as you desire. So let's jump right into it. Number 10. How well do you know your gaming partners? Episode 75. As I recall, oh, by the way, I did no review other than the titles of what happened in these episodes, so I'm totally working from memory, and I might be totally wrong. This episode was about the fact that I had totally misjudged whether my wife would like Sagrada or not, and it was kind of reflecting on the challenge of being the game buyer for your family or for your partners, and the challenge of like that they might just like something differently than you thought they would. It's an interesting puzzle to try to work through, and a good one. So that's number 10. Number 9, episode 16, on collecting. Board game collecting has been a big part of how I engage with the hobby. When I don't get to play a lot, I'm fiddling with my collection. I'm building board game inserts. I'm looking at Boardgame Geek. The collecting is a big part of what I'm doing. And so the episode where I talk a little bit about the pleasures of collecting and the role that collecting takes in my board game hobby was really an important one for me. It also gives you a taste of the early youth of the podcast, 4 months ago or whatever. So That's episode 100, or that's episode 16 on collecting. Number 8. Number 8 is another early one, episode 28 of the podcast. Still relatively early in its run, I guess in the first third. In episode 28, I discussed moral ambiguity in games. Honestly, the nuances of the discussion I don't particularly remember, but I was interested in the larger discussion of what you do with a game that has complicated morality. What do you do when the character is driven to discuss difficult or make a difficult ethical choice? The philosophy of life as embedded in entertainment is one of the main focuses of my scholarly side, and so looking at moral ambiguity in gaming is an interesting piece of that for me. Number 7 is a bit of a cheat. Episodes 50 through 54 are my top 50 games. Like I said, it's a bit of a cheat. It really isn't fair to put 4 episodes in one slot on my top 10 episodes, but really they're one long episode. The top 50 games comprise a long conversation about what I like in gaming, and it was fun to do. So I think it's worth a listen, especially if you want to get a sense of what kind of gamer I am. You know, I've always thought you can get a sense of a reviewer by looking at what kind of games they like, and listening to somebody's top 50 gives you a really good collection of ideas about what somebody likes. So that's episode 50 through 54. Number 6, episode 47, Ethical History. Now this one is similar to the moral ambiguity. It's about the nuance of the theme of a game and the way that the theme of a game shapes how you play it. In particular, ethical history, as I recall, springs from a conversation I had on Boardgame Geek with somebody who was using Native Americans in their game as a kind of resource or a challenge. And I was sort of discussing the way that does or doesn't fit in what I would consider an ethical approach to historical contexts. It got me talking about Mombasa a bit and the challenge of making a game about colonization, especially in something like Mombasa, where they don't particularly care about talking about the hardship that the English or the European settlers in Africa caused. They're just interested in the wealth that they generated and the economic system created by the game. And so Mombasa becomes a challenging ethical situation, as did this other example I was talking about. So the challenge for a game designer that I lay out in the episode was, how do you engage ethically with these sort of larger questions of history when so much of history is about people treating each other badly? That was number 6, Ethical History. Number 5, my 5th favorite episode, is the earliest episode on this list, number 7, on being a Carebear. I think I've mentioned a few times that I am a Carebear player, meaning I generally would like for everybody to have a good time, even in a competitive game where we're trying to punch the stuffing out of one another or steal one another's stuff. I want it to be done in a way that we have a good time and we can enjoy ourselves. You know, a really mean game where I know that it's mean and we're all being mean to each other, I enjoy that often because there'll be a cathartic amusement in the stabbing and the taking. The complexities of creating a game that's competitive but can still be fun are really difficult, and so there are games that I just don't want to play because they involve kicking over somebody else's sandcastle in a way that's not fun for me. I think I also talked about this in the context of Richard Ham, or Rado, who is the sort of most famous Carebear player on the internet. Plays 2-player games with his wife and has fun doing it. So episode 47, on being a Carebear. So number 4 is the most recent episode on my list. So we go from the oldest episode to the newest one. This is episode 98, which just passed. This is the board game Sommelier, particularly horror. This is a new segment that I just tried out for the first time, and I thought it went really well. It's the idea of taking games I like and pairing them with other aspects of the genre that connects them. So pairing games that fit different kinds of horror subjects with other texts that elicit those same kinds of horror. I find that a really satisfying intellectual activity, and also I think it's an engaging and good episode, well organized and so on. Every now and again I'll make an episode that I feel like is not very engaging or well organized, and that can be a bummer. So I really like when I manage to do it right, and I feel like the Board Game Sommelier horror episode fits that criteria pretty well. That's number 4, episode 98, Board Game Sommelier. So I have 3 more to go that I think are the best episodes of the podcast, at least to my quick memory. My third favorite episode, Coin Flip on a Knife Edge, number 72. For one thing, I just love the title, Coin Flip on a Knife Edge. It's great. But the idea of the episode comes from the context or the question of how do you negotiate as a designer the point at which somebody is going to win or lose. In particular, I was playing a game with my co-designer Rob, and we were talking about how there'll be a moment in the game where it just comes down to, well, this moment decides who wins or not. And the more obvious that moment is, the more it feels like the rest of the game wasn't important. And there's a balance to be struck in designing a game where you want the game to end once it's clear who won. So that's one of the challenges with the game I'm working on the long term, is that everybody can kind of, at least in some iterations of it, everybody could tell who was going to win well before that person actually did. And once that's happened, you shouldn't still be playing the game. But at the same time, if you let that be the moment that decides it, then it pushes the end of the game up too early, and maybe it's not fun in a different way. So the careful balance, the knife edge part of it, seems really important to me. The idea of trying to figure out how to walk a line where you make the game fun, but you also keep the tautness of the design intact. So that's Coin Flip on a Knife Edge. All right, episode 2 is another 2-parter. I cheated twice. So I have one more episode where I am putting multiple episodes in the same slot. So my second favorite goes to a subject that is my favorite subject when I teach, and that's the subject of intellectual property. I'm really fascinated with the complex landscape of ideas and conversations we have about intellectual property in our culture. The ways that we talk about what creativity is, and the nuances of how we decide who gets to do things and when they get to do things, and what should be paid for and what should be free, and so on. And so in slot 2, I have episodes 32 and 33, which are about the concept of free riders and free riding, which is essential to the modern media landscape. You know, if you listen to any podcast where they ask for money, but you don't give money, you're a free rider, meaning that you are able to partake of the text for free because other people are paying. That other people paying allow the text to continue, and you get to partake for free. Now there's nothing unethical about that. I mean, free rider sounds like a dirty term, or like a pejorative to describe someone as a free rider. But in fact, it's the current market model for a lot of these podcasts. A lot of podcasts right now are built around the idea that most of the audience are free riders, and that some of the audience decide the podcast is good enough or interesting enough that they're willing to then chip in some money to help keep it going. And those people will sometimes get extra things, right? That's what the idea of freemium is. It's premium for some people, free for most. But like I said, built on the idea of the free riders. So I have 2 episodes about free riders in games and in podcasts and in the internet. And then my favorite episode is also about that. And that's an episode that I think has a fun title. It's an episode that's also about intellectual property. Before I get to that, though, I'm going to mention 2, what's the word I'm looking for? Honorable mentions. Episode 63, Art versus Audience, and episode 34, Remix and Creativity. I think both of these are really interesting episodes that engage with fun ideas, but they just, they ultimately weren't quite as interesting as the rest of those I saw, or they overlap too much. Frankly, the Remix and Creativity episode is pretty interesting, I think, but it overlaps a lot with the free riders and with other episodes about intellectual property. So I thought having all of those be in there didn't make sense and doesn't give you a good sense of the breadth of the show. And if I'm looking at my 10 favorite episodes or 10 favorite blocks of episodes, that having 3 in there about intellectual property doesn't highlight what the show does. Instead, I would highlight as my favorite episode, that's episode 42, The Curious Case of Jakub Rozalski. Jakub Rozalski is the artist behind Scythe, well known and beloved for his creepy steampunk art. There was a mini scandal around the time that I made this episode a few months ago, where somebody alleged that Jakub Rozalski wasn't making original art at all. Instead, he was just tracing images from other places and claiming them as his own. And there was a long and interesting discussion about the role of tracing in art and the role of citation and copying and how much remix should be a part of the larger cultural conversation. And it was a really robust and interesting conversation that I took part in by making that episode. And to the date, I think it's my most listened to episode, which makes it, in part, it's my favorite because I engaged in a way that got people interested. But I think I also did a good job of asking interesting questions or talking in an interesting way about what was going on with Rozalski and the Scythe art. So there you go. There you have it. My top 10 episodes of Pick Up and Deliver for my 100th episode. Which episodes are your favorite? Pop by Boardgame Geek Guild 3269 and let us know the ones that you think are worth listening to. What should I make sure to do in the next 100? What kinds of things should I aim for? What are you hoping that I will get done? Thanks for listening. I look forward to talking to you later. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.